think they want
Yeah.
to take it on.
I'm sure. You know, still got high hopes. You doing it out, we're still bowl eligible.
Who's event tonight? I'll never forget the night that we did purchase the NTA event, all the cities they don't have. Really? Yeah. And I was like,
2000
I just learned, I just learned. Really? Finally. Yes, we got it. Yeah. We all got called down, well, invited to the school board meeting that evening in November, where that announcement was made.
So that was right when we started.
That was a couple weeks after that.
Oh my gosh, what a beginning.
Yes.
And then you had the one that was fired. Agree with that one? The candle was too close to a bouquet thing, and the bouquet started on fire.
Okay, good morning. It's 8:30. We call the Utility Policy Committee meeting to order. And one bit of housekeeping, the Zoom link for those who want to join, I guess if anybody's called in, the Zoom link was emailed out to everyone. Next item is to set the agenda. Any changes or corrections? Hearing none,
You need to
a
make a
motion?
I move to accept the agenda as presented.
I'll support.
Motion by David, support by John to accept the agenda as presented. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. 6-0. Oh,
Thank you.
okay. And there's no, okay, so there's 6-0 and 1 absent. Introduction guests. Do you want to run through?
Hussein from Richardson Township. Good morning, everyone. Morning.
Morning, welcome. And then online, we usually have more attending. We have Rich Pearson of the Regional Commission in attendance virtually. Next item is acceptance of the October 12th, 2023 draft minutes. Any
I'll move approval.
Second.
discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0, 1 absent, with Tom making the motion and Peter seconding. Unfinished business, the water connection fee. Oh yeah, but public comment, I had already checked this. Any public comment this morning, either in person or online? Hearing none, then we will proceed to item 6, the unfinished business. The water connection fee, system capacity buy-in fee. And last month, the UPC approved the system capacity buy-in fee at the November meeting. I believe it was November. And then October 12th. And then the regional commission also discussed this and voted to make a recommendation to their members that are water contract signatories to adopt the amendment, the contract amendment. And,
The contract was updated by the regional commission attorney and provided to the city attorney, and they were in agreement with those changes for the wording.
correct,
And then the appendix G, previously referred to as appendix F, was updated and provided as a component of the contract to be approved by the participant signatories. And then I think, Tom, I'll put you on the spot, you're going to kind of facilitate getting that approval process going. Does that make sense?
Yeah, just to take it out to the townships, we don't have a final document yet, right?
we do not, we
Okay.
have a document that was mailed out to this group that is, last night it was mailed out, early evening, and that's very,
This document?
yes, and it should be final or very close to final.
Because we, in conjunction with, going around to the townships for wildlife protection, what we talked about. I was gonna be going there to talk about that. I'm gonna be there. I can talk about this to the different township boards. And we are starting on Monday in the township, so sooner that gets in their packet, the better. I think that Mark Miller is preparing them for that, and Don. But it'd be nice to let them have that in their package.
Would we anticipate getting these all back signed by December?
The end of December is the stated goal to the township?
Right.
Yes,
So for the city, we would take this, through city commission and, essentially request, approval, for the city manager to sign all documents, and then we'll hold that until we receive from all the townships, and then have city manager sign that version with all township signatures.
So the question I have, and I think I saw some correspondence that went around, that we're gonna get separate signatures back from all the townships. It's not gonna be one document.
that is the way that the water agreement was handled. And so that's the way this is starting out, unless we hear back differently today.
So what's gonna happen is those signatory pages will be sent back to Tim Ferrand to put them together and then
It goes to
distribute them.
the-
So it'd be just like last time.
Yes.
Okay, so then one additional, comment would be, do we include Ross Township in that so that?
So
they
Ross
know?
Township, has Ross Township signed that agreement?
Not yet, not yet. This is probably the first time that they're seeing that.
So I would presume that that would be in their agreement that they would sign, so it wouldn't need to have an agreement and then an immediate amendment.
Yeah, well, I guess let me back up. The concept from the city would be to have the city sign it once, and it would include all the townships, including New Township. So that we don't have to come back to the city commission to execute an agreement with Ross, and then execute separate agreements with the, 7
Yes.
signatories.
Yeah, we can work to figure that out.
So the town, so
That
Ross
has to
Township,
be done, but we'll approve it by then.
so would Ross have to sign the agreement and the amendment at the same time, two different signatures? Or would they just sign the agreement with the amendment in it?
Yeah, that my thought was just there.
Actually, aren't there two amendments that have to sign as well right now? I mean,
One,
They would sign the new agreement, which would include the.
Did we do an amendment before? What was that?
what was the other amendment that was done?
I don't think so, but I could be wrong.
See, I guess I'm understanding Tom saying, wouldn't Ross have the entire packet, one and done with everything? So the wellhead protection, this amendment for the system capacity buy-in fee, the original contract, and forgive me for having a moment, I thought
So
we carried one.
The wellhead protection is independent of this contract. That's a separate item.
Yeah, we'll have completely separate, and we're not on any kind of time frame for that. We'd like to get it done in the next couple months. And since I'm out there already,
Correct.
we're just gonna take up this other thing. But I guess we need to, number one, understand if there's another amendment. I don't,
can't think of another one. We
We'll
haven't
double
gone
check
back
on
to
that.
all the signatures.
Yeah.
We haven't gone back to the city commission since the original, signing.
And we haven't gone around to the townships because we would have done the same process. Was that a bylaw? When we adopted bylaws and we
I'm
adopted.
having a moment. I'm sorry about that. But, you know, I guess back to what I was hearing you say is it should be an all-in-one.
So for all, my,
For Ross, right?
yeah, so my approach was to give the amendment for all the people who've already signed.
Correct.
But then for Ross, correct theirs with the amendment. It's not really an amendment at that point.
Yeah, it would be essentially this document, accept all changes. Would be the agreement.
Because the city signature for Ross would be a different date than what the original water.
Correct, it would be that new date going forward, so.
Is that acceptable?
I think so. I mean, we've got Attorney Leal here. This is all getting dumped on him. We've been working with Bill Bates, you know, so we'll work with Bill to get back up to speed on everything. I think we want to make sure the timing's there, because effective January 1st is when we plan to start charging for the system capacity buy-in fee. So, you know, we've got 3 opportunities in front of the city commission between now and January 1st. And this stuff will be on the docket, so to speak, so we'll make sure that we're timely in that, we get that into December.
So yeah, I think where Director Baker's coming from is from the city's standpoint, we would bring this to the commission for approval probably in December.
Yeah.
Probably just to make things consistent, you know, might probably get tied in the same type of meetings that we have for the RINs. So that we can kind of hit utility things and have Director Baker explain it once, at least for that particular evening.
Just a one trip deal?
Yeah, a contract amendment would be just one. It would be obviously a separate agenda item.
Yes.
Yeah, and then once we get all the township signatures back, then we get the city manager sign it, and then it'd be complete. Just
So if I'm understanding, then the Ross agreement with the city would be another city agenda item.
right, that would be one, the amendment, and
Would
then
be
also
one.
another one to authorize a signature of adding Ross Township to the contract. Having the city manager sign a contract between the city of Kalamazoo and Ross Township.
Okay.
So last question, or probably not last question, but where is this document? Whose desk is this document on right now?
It has been circulating between Bill Bates, me, Rich Pearson, and Tim Brand, and actually Peter too.
Right,
Originally, you worked with Tim.
yeah,
Tim
so I
on
worked
the-
with Tim on,
So I have the last to your question, and I sent that out to everybody last night.
Okay.
And everybody has the original, well, Bill doesn't have the original. Everybody has the original, except for Bill, the city, but that needs that final review. Because the coordination, because we've had changes at this meeting, and then things came up to change after, and
Just because, I mean, sure Kalamazoo Township has another meeting after that. They're looking at the wildfire protection on Monday.
so the goal is to have this finalized by the end of today and out. To confirm that it's the final, to your point, because that understanding that Monday meeting is the first, and it needs to get in the packet.
So when I get back to the office, I'll call Mark Miller and let him know.
He should expect it, and Rich sent that out to the clerks yesterday. He told the clerks that they should expect it by the end of business today. So, everybody, please look it over. Lisanne?
I'm really sorry, I know this is out of order, looking at the question. But I wanted to get clarification. I have already communicated with Ashley and I would like to have. City has
So the,
city.
the question is, from Lisanne, since your voice might not have been picked up, is, has the city reviewed and approved the system capacity buy-in fee? And the answer to that, I received a reply from Bill Bates, yes, it looks good to go. Appendix F. So, I'll let the city speak as to.
Yeah, I mean, it looks okay, right? I mean, we
Yeah.
haven't taken it through any approval process yet.
Correct. Yeah.
So perhaps we could approve it subject to the city, giving final approval.
Correct, and our strategy has been, to receive, approval through all the townships and then bring this forward as just the same as rates, similar to how we're doing with the UBC currently, in that, we've got a rate proposal on the table, everybody's in support of that, and then we're gonna take that to city commission via ordinance. So the city commission's approval will actually be via ordinance, so that's kind of the final step of it. Whereas the township approvals are via contract and support. So the city will be contract as well, but that additional step, the actual ordinance.
So from the city standpoint, we feel comfortable with adding
Correct, and we support that.
And I would say that, last meeting, this group approved the, calculation and the concept. And the regional commission saw that and they suggest that the participants, approve it. And I think, and I've seen the contract or the modifications multiple times. And I think if there's any tweaking, it's going to be a word or something. There's no, from my perspective, there's no substantive change that's going to occur. It's pretty much rock solid what they have. I think there was the concept, there's an abbreviation in there and they wanted to say what that meant. Things of that nature, and it's not a lot of changes either. So I would suggest that, all the participants approve this, get it to the city, they're the final approval. I don't think I would say subject to the city approving it. If they don't approve it, it doesn't happen. So it doesn't really matter, and I suspect the city is, and the city attorney has seen the documents, and so, and the calculations have been shared, so I don't think you need to be hesitant.
Okay. I just wanna make sure.
Yeah, I think some of it was just like the numbering of sections. There's maybe 5 sentences added to the contract, I think, and then the calculation. So it's not like a substantial rewrite or anything.
Correct. There was just a lot of coordinating to get the right appendix name,
Yes,
spell out those acronyms, and so those were the changes.
Thank you. I apologize for interrupting. Wrong time.
So it's good clarification. Any other, Tom is working the schedule with all of the townships, so except for Ross, we don't have anything scheduled for that.
No, because that's the contract. But then Ross will need to immediately thereafter adopt water protection ordinance. So, and then once, I would guess, again, my thought was get the contract signed, know that that's gonna happen, and then we can bring that to you and talk to you about it. Bring it before the board after the first of the year.
I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, if we're bringing Ross as a separate action item, city commission, there's time, because there's
Okay.
no customers in Ross,
Yeah.
there's nothing happening January 1st, so we've got time for Ross to maybe even read the contract before.
Yeah.
They're expected to do something, so there is time, for Ross.
Their attorney also works with other townships who are in this group, so he'll be familiar with that.
Capital improvements, we've been working on the existing neighborhoods developments projects, the policy guidelines, and there was the most recent draft was included in the packet.
I believe that, we put that to, after the UPC meeting in October, we took it to the regional commission and discussed it, and the regional commission is in support of it. And I believe it is now, and then we had a committee meetings following up, and there was some changes that were made to make it more of an official document. Very minor changes, and I think that, Jeff, you threw it in front of the city attorney just for one last review.
Yeah, still gotta get the review on that.
So as soon as that comes through, then we can adopt that.
And if there are any significant changes, the subcommittee will meet again.
And our packet has a summary.
Yes.
Yes.
And as far as I know, there are no neighborhoods in the pipeline. There are one, other than the one on NL that can only be done when that capital improvement plan project is done in 2 years anyway. So there's no critical timing issue there.
Okay.
So Jim Bierman Center.
John, is,
Jim Bierman. I don't know, son.
send him the link again? Okay, the utility financial policy, item 6B.
We have not gotten together since the last meeting, so don't have an update on that item for this meeting, but should by next meeting.
Okay. And the clip for clarification subcommittee is you, Steve, and Peter?
Peter.
Okay.
Yep.
Very good. And then D is the 2024 water rates. And I assume that Stantec will introduce this item. Seems they're
All right.
I can try and walk you through this if you like. I was the holdup on last time voting on this. If you want to wait for Stantec, that's fine.
I think,
Or I can walk you through what I did subsequent to our last meeting. and
sure,
walk
why don't you
through
go
it.
ahead?
Sure. So the last time we got together, I had received this document and it's in everyone's packet. Which is a summary of the rate calculation. I just want to show you the cover. I think yours is in black and white. You've received this as well. And it goes through the data that's utilized in the calculation of the rate and projects it out. Many of the pages are just projecting out year after year what's going to happen with the cost of operations, chemicals, all these types of things. And then Stantec has put together a model to utilize that data and other factors to identify what a suggested rate would be for the city. And the signatories, and that is provided in this summary format in table 14. The pages. it is on page 14. I'm sorry, it's not table 14, it's table 7 on page 14. And so this is a summarization of some factors, and I can just touch upon them. We've seen this before from Stantec. We saw this slide at the last meeting. And so my thought was I wanted to make sure that all the items that were identified within the rate calculation for the contract were addressed for this model. And so I had met with Stantec and James and other folks before with Zoom and looked at this calculation months ago, 5 months ago, perhaps. And we identified some things that needed to be modified. And then I followed up and met with Stantec and James probably shortly after our last meeting, maybe the next week. And we walked through the calculation and the tables that were provided. And I went through the contract section 8.4 that identifies the various factors that need to be considered. And so that's direct operations, administrative costs, indirect costs, debt service, payment in lieu of taxes. And basically I just checked them off to verify that, and they have the contract. So I just wanted to have a look, okay, let's make sure we get this as close to ideal as possible for the current year. So I went through those calculations with them, and the big drivers of the rates are within this document. If you look at four lines down, it says all in DSC. That's all in debt service coverage, and it's in the top component of this document. And you should see for 2022 where it says 2.6, and then it says 2.2, and then it says 1.9. Are you following me?
Mhm.
Sorry, I don't have a thing to look at. So the contract says consider a bunch of costs in the determination of how much revenue you need to bring in. Costs as well as debt service. So really consider cash. What do you need in, and based on what is expected to go out. And make this calculation and then consider debt service coverage and the utility financial policy for reserves. So that's what they're doing within these calculations. And when we went through this process, I came to the realization, and James may have a different opinion, that the utility financial policy is not well defined in the case of reserves. And the calculation utilized in the reserves, which is the first graph right here, where you see it going drastically down and then straight across, that needs to be modified via the utility financial policy going forward. But it's not it's not the driver of the rates this year, but that needs to be addressed going forward, because that calculation, I do not agree with it, but the driver is still that all in DSC, debt service coverage. If we want to borrow, we got to meet our bond covenants. The target is 1.4 per the utility financial policy. And in order to maintain the debt service coverage, a 6% rate increase is necessary in the current year, projected out for the next year, projected out for the next year. I asked that they modify their model to change the amount of revenue to, say, a 5% rate increase, and that ultimately results in us not meeting our target in year 5. And so, knowing that there's an issue with this reserve, that is our operating reserve, and the calculation of it, and the definition of it, within the utility financial policy, it is not clear. What do you start with? That the debt service component is the driver. We need to meet our bond covenants, and a 6% rate increase based on the capital that's projected and the debt rates and all these things that are projecting out would be a conservative approach to funding the water improvements as well as the water operations to meet our bond covenants. So if we decided, no, we don't want 6, we think it should be lower, very quickly, we're not going to meet our bond covenants for this model. And so I feel comfortable with the 6% increase going forward, looking at the data, and I don't have the model, so I don't look at the formulas. I can't. Theoretically, I guess I could with them, but they don't give me that component. I can see the projections and reasonably, and they're considering the factors. But I think we came to the conclusion, or I did, is that service is paramount. We have to meet our covenants. Well, people aren't gonna wanna buy your bonds, that's how it works. And if we were to go with less than a 6% rate increase, it would be relatively soon, we would be running into that target and perhaps, not meeting your bond covenants. And I don't think we wanna go anywhere near that issue. So, I think the model needs some tweaking going forward based on an updated utility financial policy, at least from a refining and defining some components. But overall, to meet those covenants, we need to be at the 6% rate. I don't know if that provides you with, and I'm sure that rate consultant is much more eloquent with it, but at the end of our meeting, with Mr. Baker and myself and the rate folks, it kind of came down to the bond covenants drive it all. You're trying to cover your expenses and you still have to hit this coverage ratio. That's just the bottom line. And so regardless of all else, if the projections are good, we have to have a rate increase to meet those covenants. The target actually is what we're shooting for within the utility financial policy. That's clear. It's the other reserves that aren't as clear within the utility financial policy, and thus the reason that we need to address that in the next 6 months before we calculate rates once more.
Thank you. And Jim Bierman is now just joined, so you want to repeat? No.
No, I mean, I just thought if they weren't gonna make it, let's get it done. No, you're right.
Just question, that 6% includes the capital improvement plan, that's.
Yes, so that 6% would provide sufficient coverage for projected cash funding and debt funding of the capital improvement plan and operations as well. So I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah, but the debt service is the big driver.
Yeah, and if I may just provide some more comments on capital, we only plan to fund about 75% of the stated capital plan. So the capital plan that comes out with the budget, it's not our intention to fund dollar to dollar what that plan states. Rates would only support about 75% of that, and that deals with project execution, project timelines, and a number of factors that all kind of coincide and create our capital execution rate. There's another block of projects that are defined under DWSRF. Those are the projects where we apply for DWSRF, and they're handled in the rate differently. And so from one year to the next, we may show those, but we may not be successful in obtaining those project awards, so that those just don't happen.
Right.
And all through that's correct.
Yes.
Another question about that. So reminding us about the debt service coverage of 1.4.
Yes.
And is that the all-in debt service
Yes,
coverage?
yeah.
So that means that even on this, and we're falling below that in 2031.
Yes, but, and you are totally correct. The calculation does that. But realize this is projecting everything.
So this is not the 75.
Well,
It's projecting 75% of the projected capital. But realize, where I was looking at 5 years, when you look out 10 years, every component of this calculation is a projection.
Yeah.
And therefore, my take on it is, my crystal ball sees 5 years. I don't know that it will tell me 10. Yeah. And if next year will be maybe we could look out again and make sure we're always on the target at 5, perhaps, or something of that nature, just because there's so many variables in there.
Yeah,
Everything's projected.
the accuracy out at that level is
Less and less.
as you go out. Yeah.
And my take on it was looking at the reserves and looking at the debt service coverage, that drives the rate 100%. It's capital, operations, and what do you want for your reserves? And so looking out 5 years, you're hitting our target. and then changing that rate to be 5% increase for 5 years, we're not hitting. We're just below it.
So Peter, I think you've done a good summary of what happens every year to review the water rates. We take a look at what's our personnel costs going to be? What are the operating costs going to be? What are the chemical costs going to be? What are the capital costs planned for the next couple of years? What debt payments do we have coming up right now from past projects? And what debt payments are we adding to it with new projects coming online? And so this is the kind of the Cliff Notes version of how the debt or how the rate making process works. And obviously each one of those numbers, there's 100 line items behind each one of those numbers. And some of them are assumptions that, okay, we assume based on the capital plan that in 2026, we're going to have X, Y, and Z projects. And so, so to your point then is that then helps us derive, well, it looks like we need an X% increase because of all these factors combined. And if we dial it down a little bit, what does that mean? If we were to dial more capital into it, what does that mean? And so that's the process that, again, we have talented folks like everybody sitting around the table with Peter's help and Steve Ascenzi, who's our CFO, but, and then Stantec, getting all that information and then running those numbers for us.
And within the document that we received, it shows you like, what are we projected for wages and benefits? And so, even if you change some of the inflation factors, things would be different for sure. But my thought is we want to always be err on the side of conservatism. This is a long-term agreement, long-term capital is going into the ground and into the air or what have you. And everything appears to be reasonable. Staff has looked at it and it appears to be following the terms of the contract. And therefore, I wanted to just make sure we got all the things ticked. We do need to address the utility financial policy because the interpretation of a component will drive rates in the future, but we still need to meet the bond covenants as paramount. And so I'm very comfortable that going forward, as things get refined, the process gets smoother, there becomes more familiarity with what's occurring in here and what is being suggested by the rate consultant will be a prudent approach.
Yes.
Another question about that. So we see this kind of fall off a cliff thing on the operating reserve fund,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I thought there was also an expectation, maybe not from the bond side of things, relative to us maintaining operating reserve and some minimum. Is there no expectation there or is there best practice?
There very much is a operating reserve and a reserve requirement, and I believe it's being met. I just don't believe that calculation is the appropriate calculation of that reserve. It is being stably held over time. That what you see coming off the cliff, I think, is a misinterpretation of some data or in the capital side, that it would be spent down from cash, and it will not be. But I feel comfortable with, after discussions with Stantec and our understanding and their interpretation of the operating reserve, where do you start? And I have a different interpretation, and it's not clear. But it's not the driver. It is just a component of looking at this, and I would disregard that drop personally. Here I do.
The short answer, we're still meeting our reserves.
Yes, that's the key. And if we were substantially above it, we could have a lower rate. And the reserves need to be better defined because I can show you exactly how they interpreted it, and I can read it, and I don't interpret it that way.
And I think, again, what we're seeing, and those are all valid points, is a very aggressive capital program over the last few years that has gone into a number of different factors for the water system inside the city and outside the city. And, that has had an impact on how much we spend and how much we draw down. And then, all the work that's been going on to pull in grants. So all these things kind of, they don't offset each other, but they're all part of the equation.
And the grant funding has been a blessing for a lot of that activity that was planned. And we're hoping there's more in the pipe. So as we move to the next year, we're hoping more is funded with the grants and perhaps it can ease off on the increases, but that's yet to be seen.
Thanks, Peter. And your comment that it's a conservative model in terms of the projections makes all the sense. I think the 75% capital, I think we had discussion before that the actual is 50% roughly.
Well,
So
I think the model is before this point in time, James, correct me if I'm wrong, was projecting even a higher realization of the capital.
Yeah, correct. The execution rate
Was even higher. If you look back 10 years or 15 years, it wasn't as, it may have been in the 50% range. And I think that's good.
so 75% is conservative and appropriate for them.
I think so. I would really leave that kind of thing up to Mr. Baker and the city staff. They know better of what kind of delays there are with just materials versus contractors' availability and that things. And so I totally rely on James for 75%.
Yeah, I would say that is conservative. There's a lot of things that are moving around with DWSRF. I think at our last UPC meeting, I talked about our FY24 application and that we were not funded. And so that project was just going to get, pushed and not done. We received an update. Eagle has amended the intended use plan, and we have now received via the intended use plan $7 million in principal forgiveness for a $15 million project. So that's for us going to re-engage our ability to deliver that project in 24. So you can see just within 2 UPC meetings, I'm throwing 15 million out of the pot, back into the pot, 7 million of the grant into the pot, back out of the pot. And that's typical stuff that happens within the CIP. There's been a lot of things moving with DWSRF, a lot of things happening with our ACO, that's our administrative consent order, things that has to get done under certain timelines. So we're going to be taking some hard looks at CIP, not changing the CIP plan, but looking at that CIP plan with respect to what Stantec has in the SPAMS model over the next, January through April timeline to really try to hone in on what projects are getting done, which ones are delayed, which ones are moving forward, so that we can continue to, scrutinize that 75% capital variance to see is that holding true, is that real, and so that we can continue to plan for 2025 as we make recommendations.
And that component isn't the huge driver on the coverage. So if James said we got to go to 85% in the short term, coverage would likely not be impacted. Over the longer term, that'll be reflected in future calculations as that gets refined and the need, depending on what Eagle requires or what have you. It's really kind of the trend of the capital that's driving the rate, because you got to service that over each bond over a 20-year period, and you're going to cash farm some of it. But I think it's a live document that will be changing over time, following the criteria of the contract and the utility financial policy, which is a big driver.
Jim, sorry for the challenges with the sign-in this morning.
No problem. We're glad to join you. Laura and Danica from the Stantec team are also with us, and you had an excellent discussion. We put together a presentation to kind of take you through kind of the major points of the rate study. I think if you could give Laura access to share her screen, I will be, if I'm too brief on particular points, please let me know. You've had an excellent discussion. I heard probably the last 5 minutes of it. So there shouldn't be, I don't think, too many surprises in this, but we wanted to put together kind of the the key points of the whole study. So next slide, please, Laura. You know, kind of, and some of these you have seen, and I think we've touched on all of these. So we'll just take you through very briefly kind of the process that really started for us. Gosh, James, probably January, February, in this process, but nonetheless, we'll take you through the major steps. Please stop me if you have questions, and we'll go forward. Next slide, please, Laura. Thanks. And this is something we've shared with you before. It's kind of the typical steps of a rate of a rate study, particularly for a system as large as the city of Kalamazoo's system, of course, with the townships as well. But basically, the financial plan is how much do you need? Then you take the financial plan and you assign the cost components of that plan to the respective classes to determine from a cost causation perspective what each of those classes should bear of the total cost. And then ultimately you determine, you have prices or rates that you determine for each of those customer classes to address many factors, including cost causation. Next slide, please, Laura. Yeah, just kind of key points, and I think honestly you've discussed many of these already, but fiscal year 23 budget, as provided to us by city and city staff, and discussed with James probably more times than he cared to discuss it, was the starting point for developing the financial plan. And then each line item within the budget from the operating expense side was escalated using various factors, typically ranging between 2 and 5%, to escalate it out to develop the 10-year forecast. You know, typically chemicals and electricity have run higher than normal inflationary percentages. That has been reflected in the analysis and discussed with city staff for their validation. Peter, I know we've had some discussions with you as well as you got comfortable with FAM, so you've seen it as well. But kind of a typical process for us is to take a starting point and escalate it out. We also have, of course, in the financial plan, have to recover the annual debt service payment for existing debt, and then look forward as far as subsequent needs for debt financing, to determine what the annual debt service requirements look like. You're well aware that we assumed only an execution percentage of that significant capital plan, which continues to evolve probably, I would say, James, on a daily basis, if not a weekly basis. But nonetheless, our starting point assumed 75% execution of the information provided. Obviously, that's funded on a go-forward basis with a blend of suggested borrowing needs as well as cash funding certain of those projects. Our model has the ability and does utilize a funding source on each project that's within the capital plan. On the revenue side, the growth in customers in the city and the township was factored in. It's slightly less than 500 accounts. Most of that growth, of course, is in the townships that we've previously discussed. Non-rate revenue, which tends to be a very small component of the financial plan, was forecasted to remain flat. Then, of course, the financial plan then assumes necessary increases such as the 6% recommendation for the water rate increase into the plan. Next slide, please, Laura. And this is kind of the summary panel, as we term it, but, you know, it does graphically kind of give you a very good snapshot of, not only the debt service coverage, the all-in debt service coverage. Of course, the target there was 1.4 times per existing city reserve policy. Also the operating reserve, number of months of annual O&M in the operating fund graph, upper left corner, not upper left, but kind of middle left. You'll notice a black line, that assumes 3 months. Yeah, Laura's putting her cursor there for you. That assumes the 3 months of annual O&M expenditures is the reserve target that the financial plan says thou shalt not go below that in your future periods. Mentioned the CIP spending, the 75% project, you know, execution, not 100%. That's something we do in every study is discuss with all our clients, not only the capital planning, the capital projects, as well as the operating expenses, kind of what has history showing us, what do they expect as realistic, particularly in these times with the supply chain issues, material and you know, resource issues. The next to the CIP spending graph is the CIP funding graph, which shows you a mix of funding sources to support the capital spending plan. The different colors there indicate whether it's covered. Green is out of your operating fund, cash funded. Purple would be revenue bonds. The blue would be, DWRF funding. And then the graph to the right, lower right-hand corner, the borrowing, gives you an amount there. And one of the things too, we look at as well, the middle graph on the upper line, revenues versus expenses. Basically, what we're trying to do is to match cash in versus cash out needs over the forecasting period so that there are no significant gaps to the extent that can be accomplished. And then also too, and we touched on this early on in the process, the additional FTEs, starting out with 3 additional FTEs for the city in 23 and then growing to 10 total in fiscal year 2024. Okay. That's kind of in a snapshot of the recommended financial plan for the water system. Next slide, please, Laura. Laura's highlighting some things, but as I mentioned, the revenue increases in 24 give you the all-in debt service coverage, exceeding or meeting the 1.4 and the operating fund balance reserve requirement of 3 months. That leads us to a recommendation, which you're well aware of a need for a 6% increase in fiscal year 24, starting January 1st, to get the full effect of it of 6%. Specific customer bill impacts will we put this down, will vary. The overall revenue increase is 6%, but customers with low usage or higher usage may see something slightly different than a flat 6%. Obviously, with the many moving parts in, like James mentioned, after we hopped on this morning about, getting some additional loan forgiveness from the state of Michigan and so forth. Basically what it suggests, particularly with a system this size, is frequent looks, annual looks, to update, and recalibrate the model, for changes. Peter, we had discussions with Peter about, how we calculate the starting fund balance. He has some excellent thoughts, which certainly we'll continue the discussion on, with him as we look to do the water rate analysis update, for, rates to go into effect January 1 of 2025. So, with that, Laura, I think we can move to the next slide and move to the cost allocation analysis for the city. And one of the things we're doing here is looking for subsidies, where, the cost allocation process would suggest, a level of cost to each class of customers. And again, these are unified across the system. So it's, inside city plus the township customers. And what we're looking for is there's any significant, mismatch between the cost allocation, study and the revenues coming in by class. And quite honestly, this shows that no, there is nothing significant, that we felt needed to be addressed. We had discussions with, James and city staff, to get their concurrence, make sure we were interpreting the results correctly. But at the end of the day, this shows that the rates are fairly closely aligned to the cost necessary to serve each class. Having said that, that says then, if we go to the next slide, please, Laura, that, as I mentioned, closely aligned, the 6% rate increase application can be applied to all customer classes consistently across, the system. And we're very comfortable with that approach and that recommendation because of the results of the cost of service. So, okay, moving then to the proposed rate structure, I'll call it. Yes.
How do we, in essence, not have enough revenue to cover our costs in virtually every one of those categories? I'm not quite understanding that.
Are you referring to the orange and brown?
Yes.
That's
Yes.
not what, that's just saying the allocation of costs.
Allocation.
Allocation of the cost, yes.
So this
But
is
shouldn't the allocation totals match across these? Because at the end, it's, 1 equals 1.
broadly, so this group is, really getting down into the weeds and getting into what we call cost allocation study for each one of these user classes. The pursuit of exact zero should not be sought on this exercise. So to see $18.5 million in, revenue and $18.2 million in cost, those would be equal. For the purpose of our study. What we're looking at here with this is that if any two of those bars are really at odds with each other, for example, for single family, if we had a projected cost of 18.5 million, but a projected rate revenue of 7 million, that would tell us with our ordinance structure for how we break out service among classes, that we would need to apply more rate to that class as opposed to some of the other classes. So within our rate structure, we have single family, multifamily, commercial. Those are all different rate tariffs within this class. So this is a way to kind of look at all that, and we're looking at these against actual operation costs, maintenance costs that are expended in the system, and then looking at those revenues there.
Yeah.
So it's not perfect, but we're looking at wide gaps or big variances between those.
Well said, James. Yeah, it's a tool, right? That is used in the process of determining how you apply the needed rate increases to each class. And as I mentioned, to us, the costs are very closely aligned. So there really isn't a need to look at, for instance, a residential rate increase of 10% and an industrial rate increase of 1% to further align those numbers. So, Laura, if we could go to the rate design slides, please. And the proposed rate structure, I mean, the current is the rates in effect 1/1/23 after the significant 20% increase that the city had to implement based on Bart Foster's recommendation. So simply put, we take each component of the existing rates by meter size, and you'll see that the increase per unit is simply a 6% increase to the current rates. We have also, we've split it between city and township, but because of the unified rate approach that has been implemented, you'll see the rates are the same. So they simply, in the readiness to serve charge or the monthly service charge, the fixed fee, that's increased by 6% across the board. And then Laura, if we could go to the volumetric side, similar approach, right? Each gets a 6% increase in going in the volumetric rate from the current proposed. That's what's reflected in the ordinance, revised ordinance that we provided to James and the city for ultimately city council action. Next slide, please, Laura. And then, this one, I think I don't have to say a whole lot here. I don't think we had a number of discussions and a lot of work sessions, and our recommendation is the system capacity buy-in fee for any new customers attaching to the system, both inside the city and outside the city in the connected townships, recommended an initial system capacity buy-in fee of $1,175. That, of course, Laura, did we put a slide in here? That will vary by meter size. Okay. And you'll see it escalates based on the capacity factor. I call them the meter factors from a 1-inch all the way through an 8-inch type scenario. And that's to be, that's very consistent with industry practice. So, I've had some discussions with James. He's got some workshops / meetings set up with, the developers who are typically the ones that tend to pay this charge as they're developing an area with, a number of homes or whatever. So that in a nutshell is kind of, I think, where we're at. Is there any, I don't think, is that the last slide, Laura? I believe it is before, yeah. Oh, our recommendations, yeah. I think we've already stated this. 6% increase is needed, in our opinion. No need to do any structural or changes in your rate structure. And James and I have had some discussions, certainly with the city and, some of the affordability concerns and things like that with the grant and so forth that they've received. There may be something in the future, but right now there isn't any of that. Just continued with the fairly new unified rate approach for all customers, increase them by 6%, adopt the system capacity buy-in fee of $1,175. I would suggest you perhaps look at revisiting that issue every 2 to 3 years. I would suggest you likely don't need to do that every year like you hopefully will do in recalibrating the financial model and the recommended rate increases. So I think that should do it, right, Laura? brings us to the questions, any other questions that you may have. We've appreciated the opportunity to work with the city and Peter and UPC on this project. Kind of our next step is to kind of folding all this together into a report that we will share with you all. That will, you know, there won't be any surprises. It'll just be the supporting documents, you know, the schedules that we'll put in the report, and we will get that to you here. We're working on it very diligently. We'll get that to you here in the near term. And James, our intent is to have it definitely to UPC, hopefully within the next week or so, if not sooner. So any other questions for Danica, Laura, or myself?
I have one question. James, we talked after one of our previous meetings about the final report. Is that going to be adjusted to show a correction or a fix for the all-in debt service charge over the next 10 years?
No, what our thought is that we will show a 5-year plan in all our schedules, so that the out years in 2031 doesn't perhaps set off a red flag for, you know, any particular rating agency or whatever. I think as James and Peter discussed, as we were just kind of hopping onto the call, you know, those are projections 10 years out. As you move further out, that's going to, you know, have, honestly, I'll say less accuracy, but it's just further out. So I think to address that issue, and I know, is this Steve by any chance?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I had talked. The final report will show everything in like a 5-year plan, rather than trying to throw a future rate increase there in 2031 to address that. So we thought we would just, all of our schedules will be on a 5-year horizon.
Okay, thank you. And I guess just for everybody at the table, the reason why we discuss that is, you know, S&P, you know, does their rate reviews, and they're never kind. So if they ever see a number where we put out there, even in 10, 20 years, not meeting our debt service, they're going to pick up on that and have issue with it. You know, I'll say just even from my previous experience, we're way above our debt service coverage. Just even this drop off over the next 5 years is going to raise questions with them. Shouldn't raise any issue as far as affecting our rating, but it will be a discussion point that, you know, they're like, you're going to go from 2.6 to 1.6 in the next 5 years. What's your plan after that? They're going to want to talk about that. So,
yeah,
be prepared.
And I just wanted to connect 2 dots in your talk. And I think everyone on the UPC is aware of it, but just for the others as well, is initially you were talking about the projection of 500 connections a year. And then at the end, we talked about the connection buy-in fee. Realize that that's approximately $500,000 of rate relief for the current customers as a result of those folks purchasing in. It allows for that less amount of increase within the rate. And also for Mr. Mayor, that the two items that were differentiated, theoretically, you could get those to be equal if you changed, let's say, commercial connection or ready to serve and rate, and start to tweak things at a real minute detail. But when you do like a 6% across the board, you're impacting, you know, various components that are allocated differently based on peaking and things like that. So that's kind of the nature of that. Are we pretty much in line? Then okay, we will go with across the board versus having to go in and perhaps I would maybe change, or Jim would say that would be more of a structural change in the rate versus just that across the board.
Yeah, and the plan does certainly, Peter, you're correct, does assume the new customers coming on in each year will pay that system capacity buy-in fee as they come aboard. And you're exactly right, that does provide revenues that serve to mitigate the need, otherwise the need for a rate increase. Okay. Anything else for us from the Stantec team?
So the action we're looking for from this group is a recommendation of this rate. And we also need to determine the city meetings on the November 20th and then December 4th and 18th, if there's going to be representation from the UCC at those meetings. Last year we did have Tom and Peter, I think, alternated.
So within our packet, there is, within what was handed out today, there is this section 3.6. It doesn't say that on there, but then it says utility policy committee process regarding water rate approval. And it says on here, it kind of has doesn't have a flow chart. It would be helpful if it did, but it basically says, if we agree with the rate consultant, we should confer that onto the city and they can approve what the rate consultant says. Otherwise, we go back and redo things. I think in summary, it's a page and a half long.
If the city doesn't agree. If we agree.
Right.
And the city doesn't agree, then it goes back.
Right.
Okay.
And so you want to word the motion, or I don't know what would be best from the city perspective, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think because we're not just approving as a group, the 6% increase, we're basically this whole package.
Right.
Because there's all these different component rates that will go into the overall rate ordinance that gets created every year, so.
Right, and there's, in your package, there's actually a draft of what the rate ordinance would look like at a 6% increase. So that's several pages of all the different rate tariffs and schedules.
So the key sentence in the contract is the city manager or his or her designee shall forward the rate consultants and utility policy committee's recommendations to the city commission and any recommendation from the city administration with supporting rationale. So it's a recommendation.
Yes. So I can go ahead and try. Sure. Motion here. So move to recommend to the Kalamazoo City Commission the adoption of the 2024 water rates and its components as prepared by Stantec and presented on November 9th, 2023 to the UPC.
I would second that motion.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Beautiful motion.
Yeah.
Couldn't have done it.
Peter teed it up so well.
Put you right on the spot there.
Nothing so nice. It's beautiful.
Good morning. I have a question from the gallery out here in the Google land.
Motion on the floor.
I think we can entertain outside questions.
This is out of order, but if you could succinctly state your question.
Was it Cheryl Bell?
Sherry Bell.
Sure. Townships.
Motion was made by Jeff Chamberlain.
The motion was made by Jeff Chamberlain and supported by
Peter
Hackner. Okay, and you had a question or something?
Just remind me, James, relative to this proposal, we're going to be saying, first of all, Jeff, we're going to be setting a hearing date on the 20th?
So a couple of dates were mentioned here. On November, first of all, let me back over more. Next week, I believe city staff have a meeting with stakeholders.
Correct, on the 14th.
On the 14th to discuss, a presentation. That's just an informal information sharing.
Yeah.
On November 20th, Monday, at the 7 o'clock Kalamazoo City Commission meeting, Director Baker will give a presentation, again, information sharing only that night.
No, set in the hearing.
Correct. December 4th is the first, again, Monday, December 4th, Kalamazoo City Commission meeting, 7 o'clock is the first action where the rate ordinance will be offered for first reading and will be scheduled to come back on December 18th. And then on Monday, December 18th, at the 7 o'clock Kalamazoo City Commission meeting is when it would be scheduled for final action. And then it would be then in place for a January 1 implementation.
Is the, of those three meetings, is the 20th when Stantec will present information to the city commission? Or is it the December 4th?
It's Stantec, I don't think
We hadn't scheduled Santa, it would be, myself presenting to the commission
Okay,
on the 20th, just as a, kind of informal, this is all the work we're gonna do in 24, these are the new programs. There are, some considerable changes to some programs that we're gonna go into and discuss. And then these are the rate, implications and rate recommendations that we're gonna be bringing forward. So that, we'll follow that up again with probably a condensed version of that presentation on December 4th as well. But we did not plan to have Stantec in front of the city commission. We think that was satisfied in front of this body.
I think the question in that then came, if we had somebody from the UPC attend the meeting, which meeting would be the best one to attend? Probably the 4th. And you're always welcome though, on any night.
Would Mr. Wheat be available? As he's great at attending meetings.
Maybe not the 4th. I am out of the country, so no, I can't make the 4th.
yeah, I'm available, or
I would suggest, so if someone's willing, that would be great. I think we should have, representation there, just should there be a question. I know James knows everything, but just to show our support and we understand why this is happening and we've researched it and due diligence,
yes. I'm happy to then.
please
If it
do.
needs
I
to
would
be, if it
suggest
needs to be
that.
more detailed on the analysis, I think you're the person, but sounds like we might not go into that level.
Look at what I did last year was James had presented it. I'm not sure, I think it was maybe the equivalent of the 20th. But then I just stood up and introduced myself. I'm on the UPC. This is just a real quick, this is what UPC is, and we support this. So I was up there for a minute and a half, maybe.
Okay.
But I agree that it's important that the UPC be forward facing to the city commission, so they know who we are.
Okay. Any other discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Next item is wellhead protection.
Just making the rounds with the townships in the next month and a half, 2 months, 3 months. So it's prepared, it's out, it's in everybody's inbox, and we are starting through. The first one would be Kalamazoo Township on Monday night. Potentially Pavilion is on Monday, and then we'll just moving forward. So that is an adoption of the ordinance, so they will have to go through first reading, second reading. Texas Township already has this adopted, so they just need to adopt the performance standards because they haven't changed. And then Ross Township we talked about earlier. Oh, and Charleston Township is also, Jerry's indicated he's interested in doing the same thing. So I'll do that on, I'll get through these that are required through the contract, and then we'll work with Jerry at the first of the year, since it's not required, but it's a good idea.
Thank you. New business, professional services invoice approvals. There's an invoice from Ryan Newhoff, and this is for action.
I move approval of payment, Pine and Newhoff invoice number 77919.
I would second the approval.
Motion by David, second by Peter to approve the Ryan and Newhoff invoice. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain.
Motion carries 6-0 and 1 abstention. Thank you. Next item is the 2024 meeting schedule, and this is emailed out. This is a proposed schedule and a proposed location. We've been meeting here at Oshkosh. It doesn't have to be the case going forward. I did, in the interest of trying to move it along, we could perhaps adopt it at this meeting. I did reach out to Supervisor Bell and asked if it was okay for us to continue, so you can see the continual meeting here. And we have that approval. So if we want to continue here, we can. Again, it's not, if there's another preference, we can discuss that.
First of all, I didn't see, did that come from Wendy? Or was that the different email? So I guess I just didn't see it, so. Okay.
Later.
Sort of the same.
This is the same, follows the same schedule we've been on, 8:30 a.m. the second Thursday here at Oshkosh. That's the dates that are for all of 2024. And it sets monthly meetings. If we got to a point that we didn't feel a meeting was necessary, we could cancel. But it gets it on our calendars.
Motion to, okay, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Motion to adopt the 2024 schedule as presented. I'll support.
Motion by Jeff, supported by John to approve the schedule as presented. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Good. The 2024 work tasks, and this is for discussion. What we're looking at, perhaps the first quarter. And I have a few items here. I don't know if I should start or if others want to jump in.
Please, sir.
The things that I noted are the utility financial policy that Peter mentioned, trying to get that done in the first quarter. The neighborhood policy, there's some chance that'll get done actually in 2023 at the December UPC meeting, but certainly completed in 2024 if that's not the case in 23. Follow up for wellhead, make sure that those are getting done, and follow up on the contract amendment. There's a lot of players in this, and make sure that those all get done. And then the Stantec renewal is needs to be, or the rate consultant renewal is up in March 2024. The contract. So we need to consider that. Any others? That sounds like a decent amount of work.
It does.
Some of it is in committee, but. Any other? And we're on to 8, committee member, alternate attendee guest comments. Ms. Mann?
My question was answered. Thank you.
Christina?
The tax and that's what we very much.
Milestone getting a great school.
Oh, and I failed to ask, John asked me this at the beginning, if you have a comment to step to the podium, because it doesn't get picked up for the virtual. If
You want me to step to the podium? Can you hear me?
Sure, step to the podium, please.
Yes. Thank you for being great. For this body and move forward with the city. Happy to see it happen.
Thank you. Step to the podium. In a couple of months, that won't be necessary when the room is
Oh, nice.
rewired.
That's what you should say.
I see the ordinance 1944 is on for December 4th. I wondered if the sewer rate will be with that and. I can stand back. Just wanted to know if that same meeting, the sewer rate would be there, and just to confirm, is the 13, is that a dead figure? I mean, drop dead figure?
Yeah, so the sewer rate recommendations will also be made, at our stakeholder meeting on the 14th. Of this month to just a group at Harrison. You're welcome to attend that. There's also, we talked about the, November 20th meeting city commission. That's going to include wastewater, and then December 4th and December 18th. That's also going to include wastewater. Our wastewater rate recommendation that we're moving forward with is 12%, which is not 13 as previously discussed. So it will be 12%.
I was at the November meeting, and I wanted to let my board know, so 12%.
12%, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any online comments?
Hello, this is Sherry Bell. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks. So, first, thank you all for your good work. It's obvious that the details of these contracts are very important and how things move forward. I appreciate all the information. I did want to let Mr. Wheat know that in your inbox is an invitation from Ashtimo to come present for the wellhead protection ordinance. So hopefully you can join that, and that's kind of it.
Thank you. Number,
I want to apologize for being late today. I don't know if you can share it, but I had kind of an urgent dental thing to take care of this morning, so apologies for that.
Good. I wanted to thank Mr. Baker in regards to the recent information and participation in the kind of symposium for wastewater sludge removal, and just my perspective on the professionalism of the staff, and that event was excellent. So my appreciation and thanks for the ability to participate in that.
Nothing.
congratulations.
Thank you.
And yes, echo Peter's comment about the wastewater biosolids meetings last week. That was very interesting and helpful for understanding. And our next meeting then is December 14th here at Ashland, 8:30 a.m. We have exhausted the agenda and we are adjourned.